Hey kids, George Washington here again. The last time I told you about my first job as a grown-up as surveyor for Culpeper County. Well, when I left that job to become the adjutant of the southern section of Virginia, it wasn't really the job I wanted. You see, I wanted to be adjutant of the northern section of Virginia. This was closer to my home and included the Northern Neck Proprietary, areas that I was much more familiar with. But I was young and inexperienced, and I had to be patient. Fortunately for me, I didn't have to wait long to prove myself. My mentor, William Fairfax, heard about a plan to warn the French to withdraw from the territory out around the Ohio River Valley. Well, during these times, there was a great struggle developing on the western frontier. The English settlers were moving westward over the mountains towards the Ohio Valley. And from the north in Canada, southward came all the French settlers aiming for the same river valley. And caught right in the middle were the Native Americans who had been there all along. These struggles would eventually turn into the French and Indian War. Well, the governor of Virginia, Robert Dinwiddie, had gotten wind of what was going on and was very concerned about these incursions into the Ohio Valley by the French. As a matter of fact, he wanted to raise an army and drive them all the way back to Canada. Unfortunately for him, the legislature would not go along with him and would not give him the money to do it. But at the same time, the King of England was watching what was going on in the colonies, and he instructed Governor Dinwiddie to send an emissary all the way up to the French commandant in charge of all the French forces. Well, when I heard about this from William Fairfax, I decided to volunteer to be that emissary. And lucky for me, I was approved. The Governor's Council approved the plan. They got me a passport and a letter to be hand-delivered to the French commandant. I was only 21 years old, and it was 1752. My instructions were to seek out the half-king and other chieftains of the Six Nations. I was to enlist them to be part of this mission of ours and aid us in any way they could. I was to proceed to the French headquarters and take note of French fortifications and supplies. I was then to deliver my letter to the French commandant and then make due haste back to Virginia. It was thought that military confrontations would start as soon as the summer. My first step was to go to Fredericksburg, Virginia. There I enlisted Jacob von Brahm, a Dutchman who also spoke French. He was to act as my interpreter. We then went up to Wills Creek, which today is called Cumberland, Maryland, and there we joined Christopher Gist, a well-known and experienced guide on the frontier. We gathered 4 servants to go with us, and our party of only 6 men left into the frontier on November 15th. It was 10 days before we got to Logstown. This was an Indian village that was the headquarters of the Half-King. Luckily, Half-King decided to join us on our mission, and he brought along 4 of his men. Well, we all traveled about 70 miles north to Venango. This was an old Indian town that had now become a French outpost. We wanted to deliver the letter to the officer in charge at Venango, but he said no. He said we had to take our letter all the way to Fort Le Boeuf, which was just south of Lake Erie, and deliver the letter to the French commandant there. The French were very polite when we got there. We had pressed on, and it took quite a while going through the wilderness. But when we did arrive, they treated us courteously, but just like they had at Venango, they plied the Indians with liquor and tried to separate them from us. Well, The French commandant dismissed the warning from the English king and said they had no intention of withdrawing from the territory down in the Ohio Valley. In fact, I observed over 200 canoes being made ready and other supplies, and it was apparent to me that as soon as the winter weather broke, they were going to head south towards the Ohio. So on December 15th, our party left Fort Le Boeuf, and we made a speedy return to Virginia to deliver the letter of reply from the French to the governor. Well, the trip back was treacherous with winter weather upon us. When we got to Venango, Half King and his men once more were plied with liquor and delayed. Well, I had had enough. I grew impatient, and we decided to leave them behind. Well, we made out southward, and the first thing that happened is our horses began to weaken and become sickly, and we couldn't make much progress. So I had to make a decision. So I took Christopher Gist with me, and the two of us separated from the main party on foot with just our packs and our rifles and dressed in Indian garb, and headed a more direct route southward. Well, it was pretty tricky out in the woods, and at one point we got a little bit lost, but we came upon an Indian, and he said he would help us. So we felt very fortunate and started following him. But it soon became apparent that he was trying to lead us astray, either into a trap or an ambush. We weren't sure. So we confronted him, and when confronted, he shot at us. Well, fortunately, he missed. We disarmed him. Christopher just wanted to kill him. But I said no, and we led him off into the woods, and he wandered into the wilderness. Soon after that, we were crossing the Allegheny River. As I mentioned, this is wintertime, and there were huge ice floes flowing through the river. Well, at one point, I tried to push an ice floe off of our raft we had constructed, and I fell in the river and nearly drowned. Fortunately, I was able to get out and warm myself and recover. Finally, on January 7th, we reached Wills Creek. This was where we had originally picked up Christopher Gist, and the bulk of our journey was over at this point. I then made my way down to Belvoir, where I recuperated for a couple of days and then got back on my horse and headed down to Williamsburg, the capital. There, I gave my report to the governor, and in addition to the letter of reply, I had maps of all the territory we had passed through and layouts of the fortifications, along with a list of estimated supplies I thought they were putting together. Well, my report was actually published in the Virginia Gazette, which was the biggest newspaper in the colony at that time. As a matter of fact, because it was of such interest in England, I was also published, the report was rather, in several London newspapers. The House of Burgesses gave me a commendation letter and £50 for my trouble. More importantly to me, I was soon appointed adjutant of the northern section of Virginia. So my winter journey proved that I was capable of the job that I really wanted. I hope you've enjoyed the story of my winter journey, and we'll be talking again soon. Stay tuned for our next adventure in George Washington in the Eastern Panhandle. So long.